Our keynote speaker, many of you know, and I've had the opportunity to meet Dr. Kent this morning, and I know he is a fine gentleman and has been helping our institution look at the project and retention for us the last year. And I have the privilege to introduce him this morning. And his bio, or vita, is very impressive. And I want to kind of give you an overview of what this gentleman has done in his stellar career. And we are so fortunate to have him as a partner and a family member for us in this institution. Dr. Ken Farnsworth is a coach for Achieving the Dream, consulting 6 colleges in Virginia, Texas, the great state of Arkansas, with a particular interest in small to mid-sized rural colleges. Dr. Farnsworth is also our technical assistant advisor for the Walmart Foundation Press for Completion grant. Prior to his role with Achieving the Dream, Dr. Farnsworth has also been the director of the Center of International Community College Education and Leadership at the University of Missouri, St. Louis. For 19 years, Dr. Farnsworth served as president of Crowder College in Neosho, Missouri. Since 2001, he has been actively engaged in assisting with the development of new community colleges in Southeast Asia. Dr. Farnsworth served for 3 years on the board of directors of the American Association of Community Colleges and is the past chairman of the Missouri State Humanities Council. He has received the National CEO Leadership Award from the American Association of Community College Trustees and was the 2002 recipient of the Werner Kirbisch Award for Outstanding Achievement in International Education. He is also the author of 3 books, Leadership as Service, A New Model for Higher Education in a New Century, a field book for community college online instructors, and Grassroots School Reform, a community guide to developing globally competitive students. That's wonderful, sir. At this time, please join me in welcoming Dr. Kent Farnsworth.
If you want to just stand and take a stretch break for about 15 seconds while I bring up my PowerPoint and give you a chance to. I knew that was risky. But good morning, everyone. I can tell just from my experience with you this morning that you're a group that enjoys each other's company and enjoys having a great time together. Mr. Krapp, nice to meet you. One of the more interesting introductions I've heard about. I've known about Pulaski Tech for quite a long time. Crowder College, for those of you who don't know, Crowder College is in the southwest corner of Missouri, and so our closest college affiliation was with Northwest Arkansas Community College. And as I heard you talk about the things that you lead the state in, I've heard that conversation go on in Northwest Arkansas regularly with you always entering into the context as the other model for where things are happening in the state. And they mentioned you so frequently that I had a pretty good idea that this is where a lot of the great things were happening in technical education in Arkansas. I also learned how complex you are this morning when I tuned you into my GPS to come over here this morning. I knew where the campus was, roughly, but as I started out, Alice, that's what I call my GPS, wanted me to go south for some reason. Alice has this beautiful voice, and she'll say things like, "You did another dumb thing," and would try to steer me south down, must have been to your south campus. So I finally turned her off, but then as I listened to you have an east campus and obviously growing all over the Little Rock area. I'm not going to talk to you specifically about press for completion until the very end of what I have to say this morning, and I won't take you to 12:30, I can assure you of that. But instead, I wanted to try to establish some context for why this initiative is so vitally important to all of us, not just to you, but to everyone in higher education in the United States. And I'm going to base this on what's come out of a series of reports that really began back in 1983 with the Nation at Risk study. But since about 2006, there have been one report after another that have called our attention to what critical challenges we face in education in the country. And one of the things that's really puzzled me as I've listened to the political debate that's gone on over the last year is how much attention has been paid to the economy and to what has to be done to revitalize the economy, and how little attention has been paid to the thing that is the principal catalyst to making the economy kick back into gear, and that's education in the United States. And I'm going to try to talk to you in some pretty sober terms about that this morning. In fact, as I was thinking about how to approach this, I was reminded of my favorite Peanuts cartoon that shows Lucy and Linus and Charlie Brown lying on a hilltop. And Lucy says, you know, if you use your imagination, it's amazing what you can see in the clouds. What do you see when you look at the clouds, Linus? And Linus said, well, that cloud up there reminds me very much of a map of British Honduras in the Caribbean. And in that cloud over there, I can see the profile of Thomas Aiken, the famous British sculptor and painter. And that group of clouds over there remind me very much of a reproduction of the stoning of Stephen in the New Testament. In fact, there's the Apostle Paul standing to one side. Lucy says, that's great. Linus, what do you see when you look at the clouds, Charlie Brown? Charlie Brown said, well, I was going to say I saw a ducky and a horsey, but I changed my mind. And you could have gotten a Linus to talk to you this morning, I imagine, but you got Charlie Brown instead. And we're going to talk in ducky and horsey terms about what's happening in education in the United States and why the Achieving the Dream initiative is so critical in the minds of the foundations that are putting these grants forward, and press is a next extension of that, and why they view it as being so important to us. The most recent of these reports is one that was published in 2010, but really started getting attention last year from the Lumina Foundation. And it observed, let's see, thought I should just have to be able to, that when we look at that economic growth, that what we should recognize is that it really isn't dependent on those home run kind of bringing a new industry or something into our community, but it's dependent instead, both at the local level and at the national level, on the skills and knowledge of our workforce. And these reports, starting with the Spellings Commission report, which was quite political, came out in 2006, began to warn us that in this particular area, in the skills and knowledge area, we were starting to fall behind. In fact, the Spellings Commission report said that as recently as 1995, we had led the world in the percentage of our population with a high school diploma and with a college degree. But by 2006, when this report was published, we had dropped to 12th in high school achievement. This is by percentage of population, not in numbers, and 16th in terms of college completion in just a decade. Why? Not because we'd fallen back, but because all of these other countries had kicked into gear. In fact, Tom Friedman's new book, which is called That Used to Be Us, which suggests something about the tone of the book, says that one of the things that happened with the fall of the Soviet Union is that a whole group of countries in Eastern Europe, and to some degree a group of countries in Southeast Asia, were suddenly given new opportunities to think differently about themselves. And what they thought is, now we can become like the United States. And as I visited, most of my work in Southeast Asia has been in Vietnam and Thailand, some in China. But as I've talked to the people there, I hear this message over and over and over again. They say, we want to be like you. And we know we can't be like you in terms of natural resources. We know we can't be like you in terms of military might. but we can out-educate you. And that's what we're going to do. And so they kick their education systems into gear, and every year that list of who's ahead of us in terms of educational achievement gets longer. And it brings to mind a quote from Paul Krugman, the Nobel economist, where he says that if you had to explain America's economic success in one word, that word would be education. But the inverse of that is that if you had to explain the United States' economic woes in one word, that word would also be education. And if you look at this recession, the recession that we're struggling to try to get out of right now, it's really a recession of education as much as anything. Other things triggered it. Other things put us into it. But if you look at what's happened to unemployment rates by education level in the United States, you see that it's a recession of education. Those who have less than a high school degree, the unemployment rate for that population in 2010, when we reached the real bottom of the recession, was almost 16%. For those who had a high school degree only, it was about 10%, which was the average of unemployment during that time. If you had some college, 7.9%, a baccalaureate degree less than 5%, which is where our unemployment rate generally stays during good times, right around 5%. And if you had a professional degree, it was only 2%. As I was driving down here yesterday, I was listening to a program on NPR where they were talking about a new report that's just looked at recent graduates. Recent high school graduates are currently unemployed at 26%. And those with a baccalaureate degree at about 6% right now. And so a huge disparity in terms of employment opportunity based on what education you have. And the thing that disturbs me, I think, about the political debate right now is that there's this suggestion that if we only bring certain things back to the United States, we would solve this problem. If we could only kick certain parts of the economy back into gear, we could solve this problem. And that's probably true, but it's going to depend to a huge degree on education. Because when you have other countries that are younger than we are, we're becoming an old nation, that are better educated than we are, and that have much lower wage scales than we do, and when work becomes mobile, it will go elsewhere. And there are only certain things in that equation that we can change. And the simplest one for us to change is the level of education. And then we can become competitive again as a country. And as the Lumina Foundation looked at this in the most recent report that just came out in 2010, they said that if we want to achieve that level of competitiveness again, what we should be shooting for as a nation by 2025 is 60% of our population between the ages of 25 and 35 having a college degree or certificate. Not a four-year degree necessarily. In fact, lots of the data shows that the employment levels are just as high or higher among those with associate degrees and certificates right now. But 60% of our population should have some college credential. And that's the goal that they've established. And they said, unfortunately, the problem is that college attainment rates are rising in virtually every developed nation right now, except for in the United States. So why is the Lumina Foundation initiated Achieving the Dream? Why is the Walmart Foundation initiating Press for Completion? Why is the Gates Foundation jumping on both of these things as hard as it can? Because they are really concerned about this. And they don't see solutions coming out of Washington. They don't see, I'd like to say this is emotion, but it's more allergies. They start in January for me and end in December. Excuse me, the emotion will probably come sometime. They don't see the solutions coming out of Little Rock. They don't see them coming out of Jefferson City. In fact, they think that the solutions, if they're going to come, are going to come from institutions. Institutions like this one, and so they've initiated these programs to try to help us do it. Now, why did they pick this 60% target? Was it just arbitrary? No, it's because as they look at what's happening in the labor force. When the Spellings Commission report was published, 90% of the new job development in the United States was requiring some post-secondary credential. And that averages between about 60–70% for every job that's available in the country right now. In fact, I may have this in here later, but during the depths of the recession, we had between 300,000 and 400,000 jobs available in the STEMS areas in the United States that we could not fill because we didn't have a population that was well enough educated to fill them. So we have this 90% growth in jobs requiring some kind of college credential, and this is what's happening in our K-12 population right now. This is a page that came from a report from the new Commission on the Future of the American Workforce. The report is called Tough Choices or Tough Times. If you start with a 9th grade class of 100 students, how many of them right now are completing high school with their class? Nationally, between 68 and 70. So 30% of them we lose between the time they enter the 9th grade and when they finish high school. And if our national goal is 60% of the population with a post-secondary credential of some kind, we're almost doomed from the beginning if we continue as we are right now. How many of that 68 or 70 go on to college? Only 40, directly out of high school. Of that 40, how many of them will be enrolled at the end of the beginning of their sophomore year? 28. Of that 28, how many will graduate with a 2-year credential within 3 years or a 4-year in 6 years? 18. So we've gone from 100 freshmen in high school to 18 college graduates just following the normal sequence of education. Now, fortunately, we're not a system like many others in the world where you're doomed to that position once your high school years are over. We have reentry opportunities, and that's where this chart doesn't show what's really happening educationally in the United States, because big percentages of our students are looping back in and coming back into the equation, and that's partly where our hope is, although I think we can't give up on this chart. We simply can't accept that as being a standard that we can live with. Why else was the 60% target chosen? Because that's where our principal competitor nations are, or some of them are approaching that level. Dr. Ellaby said how critical it is to begin to initiate a portion of international global education into your curriculum. We simply have to learn to understand the rest of the world better than we do, because so much of what's happening in terms of economic development is happening elsewhere. So who are our principal competitors, not economically, but in terms of educational achievement in the world right now? Who do you think is closest to that 60% college credential level? Japan is on this list, but it's not first. Germany is not of the top 3. Korea is third of this group. India, too big, way too big a population. If we looked at numbers, they passed us by in terms of college graduates, as did China. But this top one will surprise you. It's our neighbor to the north. And if you took a look at what's happened economically during the recession period to Canada, they have survived exceptionally well. In fact, you've probably seen the reports about Washington being upset that all the Canadians are coming down and buying everything at Costco in Billings, Washington, because their currency is valued right now, hasn't lost the value as some others have. Japan happens to be second, and South Korea third. And so the 60% target by 2025 was chosen by the Luma Foundation, anticipating that these other nations will have moved to 60% by that time. And that if we're going to stay up with them and be competitive, that's where we need to be. Where are we now? 11? 39% nationally. The state with the highest level is Massachusetts at 49%, which probably is not surprising. How about Arkansas? Where do you think you are as a state? For your information, this report from the Lumina Foundation, A Stronger Nation Through Higher Education, has this information for every county in the country, every state and every county. And there's a PDF online you can bring up. Just scroll down through there and you can pick out any county. You can find out how Stuttgart is doing over there in eastern Arkansas. Arkansas as a state is at 26.5%. Moving to 60% by 2025 as a state is a significant challenge. How about Pulaski County? 39, almost 40%. Would you guess that this is the top county in the state? It is. It surprised me. Having lived close to Benton and Washington counties for many years and listening to them talk, I thought they must be up there near the top. But no, Pulaski County is the leader at 39%. These other counties are those that I found were contiguous to you. Jefferson County at 22. Will Saline be up or down? 28, 28, 20, almost 29. How do you pronounce this next one? Lonoke. It's at 25.9. White at 23. Claiborne at 22, almost 23. And then someone mentioned that you are a small city in terms of your size at 12,000 students. You have a number of counties that are under 20,000 in population, and the average level of college attainment in those counties is lower than 19%. Now, we can look at these statistics and think, no way in the world that can happen, 60% by 2025. And probably realistically, when counties are as far behind as these, that's not going to happen. But I don't think it needs to happen entirely in order for us to become, again, the economic lighthouse in the world. The World Bank, at a conference that I attended in Beijing about 3 years ago, projected that by 2025, or 2030, I think was the date they used, China will be the dominant economy in the world. And that was if it continued at its current rate of growth, and it's still growing at about 8%. So it's probably going to make it. So how are we going to do this? And this is where Achieving the Dream and Press for Completion come in. When we were at the press conference in Washington, a person made a comment sort of offhanded in a presentation that really struck me. It was a quote from Peter Drucker, who those of you who teach in the business area will recognize. He passed away a year or so ago, but he's generally viewed as being sort of the father of modern management theory. And Drucker said, "Culture eats strategies for breakfast." And 8 years ago, when Achieving the Dream started, it invited all of the colleges that were involved in Achieving the Dream, a very select group of institutions of which you were one, to develop a set of strategies, a set of interventions that could begin to move that retention and completion rate up, close performance gaps between students who come from disadvantaged backgrounds and those in the regular population, and begin to move the needle in the direction that all of these foundations have realized we need to move it. What did they find after 5 years of experience with these institutions? They found that some were making remarkable progress and some hadn't done squat. They'd done a lot, actually. They hadn't shown much in the way of achievement. And why not? Because culture was eating strategies for breakfast. And the institutions where they found that the greatest changes were occurring were those where there had been a transformation in culture, where the institutions had allowed themselves to start thinking differently about how you help students succeed. Not by changing standards, I want to stress, at least not downward, but by thinking differently about teaching and learning and what it would take to do it. And I'll give you a couple of examples of where those cultural changes happened and what results they had. What the Press for Completion grant asks you to do is to take your Achieving the Dream work to the next stage by initiating a series of internal conversations. What Dr. DeLong mentioned are being called thinking teams. What they want is our best thinking, realizing again the ideas aren't coming from somewhere else, so they better come from us. What will be our best thinking about how we move forward in terms of changing the culture of teaching and learning in our institutions? Kay McClenny, who many of you know, I'm sure because of her work with the Community College Surveys for Student Success, has a favorite saying that the assignments, the classes, and the programs we currently have in place were designed to produce exactly the results that they're now producing. And what does that mean if we're going to move from 40% to 60% or from 30% to 50%? It's not going to happen unless there are some fairly significant shifts in the way we do things. And that's going to take this kind of cultural change. Now, these are some of the kinds of questions that other colleges who are involved in press are considering. One of them is, how can we change our relationship with K-12 education to get better results? How can we go back to that chart and make sure that we're getting more of those students through, more of them into our institutions, better prepared? Right now, of all the students who complete high school, not the ones who drop out, but of those who complete, 60% of them enter college needing remediation in one or more areas. In community colleges, excuse me. Even with universities factored in, it's 40%. But the average for community colleges is 60%. My guess is that you're higher than that. St. Louis Community College is 90%. When the Achieving the Dream initiative began, El Paso Community College was 98%. And so what they found as they tracked those students through was that if you began your college education at the lowest level of developmental math, the likelihood that you would complete one college-level math class within 3 years was less than 10%. And when you have a huge number of students beginning, isn't this just make you feel wonderful? Buoys you up? If you have a huge number of students who are starting at that level, and we know that 50% of them fail that first class, 50% of them fail that next class, by the time you get to the first college level math class, you're down to 10% of them, we're never going to solve this issue. And so we have to find, you've probably asked yourself, especially those of you who don't teach in the developmental areas, why so much emphasis on developmental ed? Well, unfortunately, it's because so many students enter at that level and so few make it through. And that's not a reflection on those who are teaching at that level, because they're doing everything they can to help them succeed. It's just a reflection of that serious level of under-preparation. And so this is one of the questions that is being asked by some of these thinking teams. Baltimore County Community College has now started to take its assessment instrument, they use AccuPlacer, I think, down to the end of the 10th grade year for every high school in their district. And they administer it to every student as they finish the 10th grade so that they can show them, many of whom are not planning on taking any more math till they finish high school, that if they stay at that level of achievement, they are going to finish high school dramatically underprepared in mathematics. And they've also taken a couple of bridge courses down that they now offer in conjunction with the high schools to make sure students can move up to an appropriate level of math preparation. So an example of some of the different thinking that's going on. A second question. If we can succeed with one student in a class, how can we succeed with 30? What I mean by this is, if you think about, I tried to make sure that each year that I was an administrator, I taught one class a semester. I taught in the classroom in the fall and online in the spring because of legislative responsibilities. And what I found was that when I met with my class the first night and I looked out at that class, I taught government one semester, comparative religion the other semester. Had nothing to do with each other. As I looked out at that class, I could think, if I were given the opportunity to tutor this student, one-on-one during this semester for the same number of hours that I'm going to be meeting with them in class, I know I could get them through. But somehow when there were 30 of them in there, a third of them didn't make it. And so what was the difference between one-on-one kind of tutoring and working with 30 of them in the class and not succeeding with a third of them? In developmental classes, when they come into that first class, you have so many levels of under preparation that this formula doesn't really apply. But once beyond that, supposedly they've shown a level of preparation that indicates they're ready for that next subject. And yet we lose half of them. Well, is there a way that we can think differently about how we teach and learn so that we can treat that 30 like we treat the one? Now, Patrick Henry Community College in Virginia has tried to think that through. And they now have an institute for active and collaborative learning for community colleges. They sent a group of faculty through a training program, I think in Wisconsin. Where's the Johnson Institute, you know? Racine. In active and collaborative learning. And that group of faculty members came back so enthusiastic about this that they got 20 of their colleagues excited about it, tried it for a semester, had such great success that now every faculty member at Patrick Henry has been trained in active and collaborative learning, including the adjuncts. The adjuncts get a little bit of a boost in pay each semester if they go through another training program in active and collaborative learning. And the idea is that I, as the faculty member, may not be able to give that 30 students the kind of attention they need, but they can give each other the kind of attention they need. If they're properly prepared to learn how to teach and learn as collaborators rather than as just individuals or as competitors in the class. And this third one really has to do with your observation about international education in some ways. And that is that some of them are asking themselves the question, is our education preparing our students for today's reality? This is a question that often comes up in the math area. As we think especially about transfer. Truman State in Missouri requires calculus for every one of its four-year degree graduates. And there's always a conversation going on in the state about, does that make any sense? Does that make any sense for every person with a baccalaureate degree to have taken 2 semesters of calculus? Math faculty are back there saying, yes, yes. That's how people learn to think in certain ways, which is the Truman argument. But in Europe, for example, courses in statistics and probability are taking the place of college algebra for some college graduates, because they're finding that it's much more likely that a college-educated person during his or her lifetime will be exercising skills in probability measurement and statistics than in algebra. And so options are being considered, and that's one of the questions that this leads to. But there's another one that I think really applies to those in the liberal arts. Let me try to illustrate this for you if I can. I'd like you to think about what the 5 largest cities in the world were beginning in 1950. What do you think the 5 largest cities were in 1950? London? New York? Paris? Tokyo? One more? Not Mexico City yet. Hadn't come up yet. Moscow. Moscow. Now, those of you who are my age, of whom there are very few of you in here, this is the world that I was educated to. The courses that I took in the humanities and social sciences and so on educated me to this world. This was the reality of the 1950s, and has remained in many ways the reality of education in literature, social science, humanities, and so on in many places up to now. What were the largest 5 cities in 2005? Beijing. I think it's not Beijing. I think it might. Tokyo stays there. Mumbai, Bombay. In India has moved up. Shanghai is the Chinese city that surpassed Beijing. Now, you notice there are 6 instead of 5 on here. I was showing this slide to a group, and one of the people said, I think Seoul is bigger than Mexico City. So I went, that's why this disclaimer is right here. Because I looked up some other sources, and it listed Seoul instead of Mexico City. But what's happened in that 50-year period?
A regional shift.
Regional shift. Regional shift in geography and in age. The populations in the east and south are becoming larger. Now, how does this list change if we project it to 2015, which is very close? Tokyo's still there, Bombay's still there. Lagos, where is Lagos? Nigeria. Africa appears. Dhaka, where is Dhaka? If you got 500 of your students together and said, where is Dhaka? There might be one. Bangladesh. And Sao Paulo in Brazil. Many economists are saying that Brazil is the United States of the 21st century. It is where the U.S. was as we entered the 20th century. Large, reasonably sparse population, huge resources, democratic but partially corrupt government, and tremendous energy, as you saw when they were able to attract the Olympics to Brazil for this next round. And yet, this is a world to which we are not educating our students. We ignore Africa by and large, not just in our education, but as a nation. We ignore Africa. We know very little about Central and Southeast Asia. We know very little about South America. We are still educating to this 1950s list in a lot of ways. And so part of this conversation that needs to go on as we have think groups is, are we educating our students to today's reality? And I would throw into this equation that every student should graduate from college with a second language. But that moves us a whole nother notch down. There are the humanities faculty over here. And so as you look at achieving the dream and as you look at press and what it's asking you to do, which basically is to have these internal conversations with these thinking teams, and in your case, you've chosen to focus on developmental education in reading and English, and that's again where you can have the conversation about how can we get the 30 through as successfully as we get the 1 through. You're looking at orientation and advising. How can we get students to persist through this chain more successfully than we have? What is going to be the Pulaski solution? Well, that's one that you're going to have to decide. My job as your technical advisor is to try to help you find the resources that you can, be a catalyst to keeping those groups on track, help you think about possibilities. But I know that the solution's there. I spent my high school years in Iran. My dad was working for the State Department in Tehran. And while we were living there, the only English radio station was Armed Forces Radio. And every afternoon about 4 o'clock, they had a program called Teen Beat that played all the latest songs from the U.S. No hard rock, which had not developed by that time, I don't think. But in addition to learning all the lyrics to Walkin' to New Orleans and the songs that were popular at the time I was living in Iran, there was a commercial on Armed Forces Radio that has stuck with me for some reason for all these years. And it always began by featuring some prominent American like Thomas Edison. And it would say, the people around him said it couldn't be done. But Edison said, somehow there must be a way. Let's find it. And he did. And I think as we look for the Pulaski solution, that's the approach we have to take. These seem like such daunting hurdles to overcome. But if we're realistic about it, somehow there must be a way. So let's find it. I look forward to having the opportunity to work with you. I'm delighted that to have heard your new president, and you really, I almost wish I could come back to work so I could work with her. You have such wonderful opportunities ahead of you. I look forward to sharing them with you. Thanks very much.